Hi, boys and girls, and welcome to Story Time with Miss Angela. Today we're going to be reading the story called Dawdling Dora. It's a book about obedience. How many of us have a hard time being obedient? Sometimes we don't like to listen and we don't like to do what we're supposed to do. So we're going to learn how Dora handles it. It was written by Janet Noonan and Jacqueline Calvert and illustrated by Scott Holliday. So let's go ahead and go on this adventure with Dora. Dora the Dawdler was the Queen's chambermaid. Dora never did what she was told now or right away. She always took a long time to finish a task. Look at Dora doing not her task. One morning, James, the Queen's servant, told Dora to make the Queen's bed. Dora climbed the stairs to the Queen's bedchamber. First, she petted the Queen's kitten. Then she rummaged through the Queen's jewelry box. All of the pretty jewelry. Next, she tried on the Queen's coronet and danced a jig in front of the Queen's mirror. But Dawdling Dora forgot to make the Queen's bed. James poked his head in the door. He said, "Dora, make the Queen's bed." Dora jumped on the Queen's bed. She bounced on the Queen's bed. She turned somersaults on the Queen's bed. Then she played hide and seek with the Queen's kitten on the Queen's bed. But Dawdling Dora forgot to make the Queen's bed. James poked his head in the door again. He cried, "Dora, haven't you made the Queen's bed yet?" Dora played dress up in the Queen's nightgown and pranced around in the Queen's high-heeled satin slippers. She brushed her curls with the Queen's silver brush and powdered her nose with the Queen's pink powder puff. But Dawdling Dora forgot to make the Queen's bed. James poked his head in the door. He yelled, "Dora, the Queen is coming!" Dora jumped up and spilled the Queen's powder on the dressing table. Then she tripped on the Queen's nightgown and broke the heel on the Queen's satin slipper. She slid under the Queen's bed to hide just as Her Majesty swept into the room. The Queen took one look at her topsy-turvy bedchamber and fainted flat on the floor. James patted the Queen's hand and framed her with the royal fan. Poor Queen. She just can't handle it. When she awoke, she said, "Oh, James, where is that dreadful girl? Please find her and tell her to leave immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty," said James, "but first let me help you into the garden where you can rest in the sunshine." After James had made the Queen comfortable, he stomped back into the Queen's chamber. He dragged Dora from under the bed. "See the trouble you have caused," he scolded. "Why can't you do as you are told?" "Oh, James," sobbed the trembling Dora, "I promise I will never dawdle again." The very next morning, Dora climbed the stairs to the Queen's bedchamber. First, she hung the Queen's nightgown in the wardrobe. Then she placed the Queen's slippers on the shelf. Next, she made the Queen's bed. And Dora carefully dusted all the spilled powder off of the Queen's dressing table. James poked his head in the door. "Dora, the Queen is coming." Dora stood at attention beside the Queen's bed. She curtsied just as Her Majesty swept in the room. The Queen was so surprised to see her bedchamber tidy that she fainted flat on the floor. Dora patted the Queen's hand and fanned her with the royal fan. When the Queen awoke, Dora pleaded, "Oh, Your Majesty, please let me stay. I do want to do what I am told. I promise I won't dawdle anymore." So the Queen graciously granted her request, and Dora kept her promise from this day to this. Dora learned a lesson. She learned what happens when we dawdle and don't obey. She learned what happens when we do obey. Just as the Queen was very pleased when Dora obeyed, God is very pleased with us when we obey. How can you obey today and not be Dawdling Dora? Thank you, boys and girls, for joining us, for joining me with this book, and I hope that you learned a valuable lesson about obeying.